All right, today we're going to be tearing into a 1998 Honda Foreman 450, and this is the ES model, but there's not a lot of difference between the ES and the foot shift. So first thing we're going to be doing is pulling the head cover off, the head, cylinder, starter, recoil, stator, and flywheel here, and then go over here and tear the clutches apart. So to pull the head cover off here, you've got 4 10mm bolts. And these motors are a little different than the rest of the manufacturers, where they have rockers, push rods in these motors, and so they're a little bit easier to take apart and get them timed. Here is your rockers up top here. Here's your adjusters. Now to adjust your valves on these, we're going to pull your recoil pull starter here. And then we've got your sight glass over here. So that takes an Allen, and we'll pull that so you can see what that looks like. You'll find the top dead center mark, and when you get to top dead center, your cam that is in your bottom end here will be the lobes and the least amount of pressure position, and you'll be able to measure clearance in between these. And right now it feels like we're awful close to where it needs to be. If you pull this recoil pull starter, you'll be able to tell. You'll be able to move it more freely, but we were close to top dead center as it sat there. So then you're going to take feeler gauges, put it in between here, and if you can slide your feeler gauges in there in the specs that your manual says, and then you're good. If it's too loose or too tight, you want to loosen these lock nuts here, adjust these adjuster screws, and then tighten down the lock nuts. And then what I do is put that cap back on, spin the motor over with the recoil, just to make sure that your clearances are where they need to be. So we're going to continue pulling this head off of here. We've got 14mm nuts on the top. And then these rockers are just going to be able to be pulled off. And there's your rockers there. There's your push rods that go down into your bottom end. There's your 2 valves there. You've got your intake on this side. You've got your exhaust on this side. So just a 2-valve setup. So it's extremely easy to adjust valves on this model and replace valves if need be. So we're going to pull the head off. More 14mm bolts or nuts on here. A lot of these small motors you'd have to worry about cam chains up in this top end area, but on this one you do not have to. You got 10mm sitting alongside the head here. And all these will be torqued down when we're going back together. There's your cylinder head there. This is what you call the base gasket here. Or, excuse me, this is the head gasket here, and below the cylinder is the base gasket. So if we were to pull this over, we slide up and down there. You check your cylinder for scoring. We've got some light scoring here. That cylinder will need to be bored out or re-sleeved. So we'll go ahead and finish pulling this. We'll pull this starter off here while we're pulling these. And these are out. And we'll be able to pull this cylinder off now. If you use a crowbar like this, just make sure you don't get it into a spot that's going to break a fin. But a lot of times that base gasket just has a little seal to it. It doesn't take much to pull that off of there. To pull, you can see there that piston is locked up on that crank and it is in really rough condition. So we'll leave that for now and then split that case and take that piston off of there. Starter here seals up in this area. We'll make sure and try to pull that out as straight as possible. And that starter should spin over freely. If you hook it up to power, it should spin without any kind of unusual noises. Got some ground wires here we can remove, and we'll pull that pull starter off at this time. It's 8 millimeters all the way around that. We've got a lot of dirt over here to fight with us. And there's your pull starter there. What that does is when you pull that pull starter, it lifts that or springs that that arm out there and grabs the recoil cup here and turns that motor over. So a lot of times when these fail, either the spring in here doesn't spring out or doesn't spring back, or the tooth is worn too bad, or the rope breaks. So pretty common on those recoils for that to happen. Got a 17 millimeter, pull this recoil cup off here. I'll try to turn this in a way that you can see it a little bit better, because we'll go ahead and pull this starter or the stator and flywheel. All right, gonna remove this boot. And just caked in dirt. It's a Phillips headed clamp here. On those electric shift models, they've got a shaft coming out here that you can put a wrench onto, a special wrench that'll come with the four-wheeler, and shift that if that manual shift motor that's on the other side goes bad. So keep that in mind. You can use a wrench if you're in a sticky situation, or pliers if need be. But for now, we're going to pull this stator off and clean some of this mud out of here. All right, we're going to pull the stator off on this Foreman 450. Got the recoil 17 millimeter bolt all the way out of there. And then we've got 10 millimeter bolts all the way around. Out. Several different sizes here, so make sure that when we go back together, those get put in the right spot. And this is the stator assembly here. This stator is, or this flywheel is magnetic. So there will be some pull when you're removing that. This is an O-ring gasket that seals it up, so you want to make sure that you got a good one when we're going back together. If it's ripped, just throw it away, it's not worth anything. So we've got an idler gear here and an idler gear down here, and we'll just pull the one half of this off because it's sticking on that flywheel, catching on there. So now to pull the flywheel, we've got a special bolt here. This is a Motion Pro 08-0086 puller, and what this does just runs down, pushes against the crankshaft, and removes that, pushes that flywheel out. You won't be able to do it any other way besides having this puller. I like to hold it so it doesn't bind anything up in that crankcase, and just pushes it off just like that. So nothing to it. There's your starter gear there. This should turn just one direction. It's got a one-way bearing in there. If it's turning both directions, that bearing is bad and will need replaced. Let me go ahead and spin that out. There's a needle bearing that sits down on that crankshaft. That'll go in this flywheel gear here. Inspect that, make sure that's good. Here's the other half of the idler gear. I think they call that a gear reduction. Got 10 millimeters holding this case on. Get your reverse shifter arm here. Dipstick up here. And we'll remove that dipstick. Or this, we'll remove this reverse shifter arm. One more, and I'm guessing there's one under here. Maybe not. Alright, let's see if we can take that off now. This motor definitely need cleaned up before going back together. There we go, got one more there. Pull that sensor out there. And one more above it. That cover will just pop right off of there then. Here's your reverse shaft here. It's spring loaded and you've got to turn it back to remove it. So you want to make sure if you're putting pliers on there that you've got a really good hold on it. You don't want your pliers slipping in there. If you pull it back, then, well, this one you're not able to pull out. Pull it out with spring loaded there. The shift shaft. And we'll turn this motor over. I'll pull these crankcase bolts now, so we're not having to flip the motor back over. We've got a couple underneath this plastic cover. All right, then we can flip this over and we'll pull the clutches off. To adjust the clutch on this Foreman 450, you have got to loosen this lock nut here. It's a 14 millimeter, and then run this center screw, it's a flat screw, in until it touches, and then back it off 1/8 of a turn. So that is where you'll need to be at to adjust that clutch. And pull your oil filter cover off. Those are 8 millimeter bolts. filter cover, and your oil filter is a 113 for most manufacturers aftermarket. We have 10mm bolts all the way around this, but to get your electric shift motor, those gears, that assembly apart, pull out the 3 10mm. To get the electric motor off, you've got 8mm, 8mm, and a couple Allens. All right, then that'll come off all together. A lot of times these gears will go out of, come out of adjustment, or will shear off. Sometimes it's not your shift motor that's your problem, it's these gears here. And they're easy to replace. You've got an O-ring here that you'll want to replace, doing it at the same time. There's this gear set here, this one, and this gear here. Now this gear sits on this shaft that we pulled out from the other side. So if you've got an issue with this shaft, you've got to pull the other side apart to replace this. But generally this isn't the issue. Generally either the shift motor goes bad or one of these smaller gears. So inspect those if you're having some shifting problems. All those clutch cover bolts are off. Now what I do is, we'll remove these. Then you can take a rubber mallet and tap on it and try to break that seal free. What I like to do a lot of times, just put a little bit of pressure on it, just pull slightly anywhere. You tap on it a couple times and it'll break that seal, as long as all the screws are out. This one's got enough debris around it, it might be a little more challenging than that. And that is pulled off there. There's the inside of your clutch cover there. There's that adjusting mechanism that I was talking about, and that's adjusting this here, how much tension is on this clutch basket here. Got your centrifugal clutch right here. Takes 1 1/16" socket. And I like to put pressure on this so that you don't spin that motor over again. And then this clutch, you should just be able to spin and pull off of here. They've got threads on there so where you can use a puller, but not very often do you have to use a puller. Sometimes you gotta tap on the back of this clutch to remove it, but this is a 2-piece centrifugal clutch, so you should be able to pull the front off without having to mess with the rear.